Have you ever wondered why Mary Magdalene, the first witness to the resurrection, simply disappears from the Bible? One moment, she is the central figure, the apostle to the apostles. The next, she is a ghost, erased from the official story. This silence is not an accident, it's a cover-up. According to ancient traditions systematically suppressed by the Church, Mary Magdalene did not disappear. She fled. She spent the last 30 years of her life in a hidden cave in France, not in silence, but teaching her children the secrets Christ entrusted only to her. This video is about her last words, a forbidden testament spoken on her deathbed that reveals a truth so dangerous the Church has spent 2,000 years trying to bury it. Before we uncover this forbidden testament, I want to make a special invitation. If you are going through a struggle, some pain that only God knows about, leave your prayer request here in the comments. We are a family of seekers, and we pray for each other. And if you are ready to hear the words they tried to erase, comment with the phrase, "Let Magdalene speak." Let Magdalene speak. Now, like this video, subscribe, and activate the bell, because the silence is about to be broken. To understand the words Magdalene spoke, you must first know to whom she spoke them. Her final testament was not given to the apostles who had abandoned her at the cross. It was given to the children she protected with her life, the heirs of the most sacred and dangerous lineage in humanity. To find them, we must follow the trail of a legend, a journey that begins in persecution and ends in a miracle. The provincial tradition, documented in medieval texts like the Golden Legend, tells a story both beautiful and brutal. After the crucifixion, Mary Magdalene, along with a small group from Christ's inner circle, Lazarus, Martha, and others, were captured. But instead of a public execution, which would create martyrs and fuel the growing Christian movement, their persecutors chose a more sinister method. They placed them in a boat without oars, without sails, without provisions, and cast them adrift into the vast Mediterranean Sea. Officially, they had not been executed. If they perished, it was an act of God. It was a death sentence disguised as fate. But according to the legend, the boat did not drift aimlessly. Guided by a divine current, it navigated the treacherous waters and miraculously reached the shores of what is now a small fishing town in the Camargue region of southern France. Saintes Maries de la Mer, the Saint Marys of the Sea. And Mary Magdalene did not arrive alone. She brought with her the continuation of the most sacred lineage in history. The children's names were deliberately erased from the official story, but they were preserved in the fierce, unwritten memory of the local people, in the oral traditions of communities that never fully knelt before Rome. They were Sarah and Maximin. Let's begin with Sarah. The first clue is in her name. In Hebrew, Sarah means princess. This was not a common name chosen at random. It is a direct and powerful declaration of royal lineage, connecting her to the matriarch of the Abrahamic covenant, Sarah, the wife of Abraham, the princess through whom the promise of a blessed lineage would flow. But the Church, in its few, reluctant acknowledgments of her existence, calls her Sarah the Egyptian, a servant. The local people and the Romani, or Gypsy, communities who adopted her as their patron saint, know her by another name, Sara la Kali. Kali in the Romani language means the black. For centuries, this was interpreted literally that Sarah had dark skin, perhaps of Egyptian or Ethiopian origin. This is certainly possible. But anthropological studies and analyses of medieval symbolism reveal a much deeper, more mystical meaning. In the esoteric traditions of the time, black did not just refer to skin color. It represented the hidden, the occult, the Gnostic, the wisdom that remained underground, concealed from the authorities but visible to initiates. The Black Madonnas, the more than 500 mysterious statues of a dark-skinned virgin and child found across Europe, particularly concentrated in France, are part of this tradition. They are not simply statues that darkened with time. Chemical analyses confirm many were deliberately carved from dark wood or painted black from their creation. They represented the hidden aspect of the sacred feminine, the Gnostic Sophia, the divine wisdom. Sarah was the black because she was the designated bearer of this hidden teaching, the knowledge that could not be proclaimed openly from a pulpit but had to be preserved in the shadows. transmitted from mother to daughter, far from the watchful eyes of the Church. She was the princess of a hidden kingdom. Every year, on the 24th and 25th of May, thousands of Romani people from all over Europe converge on Saintes Maries de la Mer to honor Sara Lacali. They carry her statue from the church crypt down to the sea, reenacting her arrival, submerging her in the waves while singing ancient songs in a language the Church has never been able to control. This is not a quaint folk festival. It is an act of spiritual resistance, a ritual of preserved memory, a yearly declaration that they know who she truly was. But there was another child, one whose name was even more deeply concealed, Maximin. His name appears in medieval Acts of the Saints, but he is strategically disguised, referred to not as Magdalene's son, but as a companion or disciple who accompanied her. But modern linguistic analysis has peeled back this disguise. Researchers like Dr. Margaret Starbird, a specialist in messianic lineage symbolism, have identified revealing patterns. The descriptions of the relationship between Magdalene and Maximin in these texts use the same intimate, familial language that other medieval texts employ for mother-son relationships, not master-disciple. And then there is his name. Maximin, from the Latin maximinus, means the greatest. Why would a simple secondary disciple be given a name that implies supremacy and preeminence? Unless that name was a code, a signal to those who knew that this was no mere disciple. This was the male heir, the greatest in the most important lineage in history. These two children, Sarah and Maximin, were the living, breathing continuation of the Davidic line. Their very existence posed a mortal threat to the power structure being built in Rome. Because the early church was facing its first and most fundamental crisis, the battle for succession. Who held the authority of Christ on earth? Peter and the institutionalists argued for apostolic succession authority passed down through a hierarchy of chosen male leaders. But the existence of Sarah and Maximin represented a far older, more powerful form of succession, hereditary succession, the succession of the bloodline. If Christ had established a lineage, then the connection to the divine flowed through his descendants, not through an institution of bishops. If the sacred was transmitted from parent to child, why was a pope needed? Why a clerical hierarchy to determine doctrine? The Gnostic truth that Mary Magdalene taught that the kingdom of heaven is within you was made flesh in her children. They were living proof that the divine walked on earth, flowed through human blood, and was accessible without mediators. This is why their names had to be erased. This is why Sarah had to be demoted to a servant, and Maximin disguised as a disciple. Because acknowledging them as the children of Christ would not just be a theological inconvenience, it would be an act of institutional suicide. And so, the war against the bloodline began. A war of censorship, of character assassination, and of violence that would rage for centuries to come. And it was in her final moments, in the sanctuary of a hidden cave, that Mary Magdalene armed her children for this war with her most dangerous secret, her last words. To fully understand the last words of Mary Magdalene, we must transport ourselves to that sacred, hidden space, the grotto of Saint-Ebaum. Imagine a cave, high in the mountains of Provence, its entrance veiled by rosemary and wild thyme. Inside, the air is cool and still, smelling of damp earth and ancient prayer. For 30 years, this was her sanctuary, her classroom, and her final home. It is here, according to the traditions the Cathars would later die for, that an aging Magdalene, her body weakened but her spirit blazing, gathered her children, Sarah and Maximin. She knew persecution was coming. She knew the narrative being forged in Rome would have no place for her or for them. The words she was about to speak were not just a mother's blessing, they were a spiritual testament, a torch to be passed into the coming darkness. And while the complete, original text was hunted down and destroyed, its essence survived, like embers carried in secret through the centuries. Reconstructed from fragments in Gnostic texts, from Cathar oral traditions, and from the very fabric of the heresies the Inquisition tried so desperately to stamp out, these are the three forbidden teachings of Mary Magdalene. The first teaching, guard the gnosis, the inner light cannot be extinguished. My children, her voice would have been not a command, but a transmission. What I have taught you does not come from me. It comes from the Master, whom I knew, whom I loved, and who revealed to me the mysteries of the kingdom. He told me, and now I tell you, the light you seek is not in stone temples raised by human hands. It is in the temple of flesh that you yourselves are. No one can give you this light, because you have already possessed it since the beginning of time. You need only awaken to it. And when you awaken, do not allow anyone to tell you that you need intermediaries to reach the Father. The one who says, "Only through my institution will you reach God," seeks to place himself in God's place. The one who makes you fear your own direct connection with the divine is not a shepherd, he is a jailer. The kingdom of heaven is not in the future, nor in the sky. It is within you, now, always. This teaching, the teaching of Gnosis direct, inner knowledge, was the foundation of everything else. It was the central message of the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Truth, the Gospel of Philip. It was not a later invention. It was a core part of the original message, and it was the single most dangerous idea to an institution built on control. It rendered the entire machinery of a mediating priesthood, of confessionals, of controlled sacraments, completely unnecessary. It made you spiritually sovereign. The second teaching, the sacred union, the woman who knows her essence, is equal to man. This teaching was the most personal, and therefore the most dangerous to the authorities. It validated not only the relationship between Jesus and Mary Magdalene, but presented it as a sacred model for all of humanity. The love that the Master and I shared was not sin, she would have continued, though they will call it so, those who fear the power of the sacred feminine. Our union was the restoration of the divine unity that existed before the world was divided into opposites. It was the sacred bridal chamber, where the masculine Logos and the feminine Sophia became one again. And you, my children, you are the living fruit of that sacred union. You are the proof that the divine is not separated from the flesh, that it is not confined to distant heavens. It walks on earth. It lives in blood. It is transmitted from generation to generation. You carry in your very bodies the spark that unites heaven and earth. Do not allow anyone to tell you that you are less sacred for having been born of human love. You are more sacred precisely because of it. Gold, this teaching was an atom bomb to the emerging doctrine of clerical celibacy and the denigration of the body. It demolished the false wall the institutional church was building between the pure spiritual world and the corrupt carnal world. If the union between Christ and Magdalene was sacred, if it produced divine descendants, then flesh was not the enemy of spirit. It was its vehicle, its expression, its continuation on earth. The third and final teaching, the prophecy of persecution, fear not those who persecute the body, protect the spirit. Magdalene knew that persecution was inevitable. She had seen how the authorities, both Roman and Jewish, had crucified Jesus. She had experienced the forced exile that brought her to these shores. And she could see the Christian communities already dividing between those who preserved the original, liberating teachings and those who were building rigid structures of institutional power. Her final words were a prophetic warning and a sacred charge. There will come a time, she prophesied, when those who claim to speak in the Master's name will hunt down those who truly keep his teachings. They will burn our books. They will destroy our communities. They will torture and kill the bearers of Gnosis. They will say they do it for God, but they will do it for earthly power. When that time comes, and it will come, do not fear the death of the body. The body is a temporary vessel. Gnosis is eternal. If 1,000 bearers of the light die, the light itself cannot be extinguished, because it lives not in scrolls that can be burned, nor in temples that can be destroyed. It lives in every soul that awakens to its true nature. So, protect the spirit. Transmit the teaching in secret. Preserve the memory. And though 1,000 years of darkness may pass, the light will, eventually, shine again. This prophecy was fulfilled with terrifying precision, and its final words became the sacred mission of a secret network of guardians who would carry this forbidden legacy through the fires of history. Mary Magdalene's last words did not fall into the void. They were a seed, planted in the hearts of her children. And that seed grew into a secret network of guardians, a chain of souls stretching across centuries, who risked everything: their lives, their families, their entire communities to keep alive the truth that the authorities desperately wanted to erase. To understand the survival of this teaching, you must understand the courage of its protectors. The first guardians were the Gnostic communities of the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Gnostic, from the Greek word gnosis, meaning knowledge. These were the first inheritors of Magdalene's core teaching, that the kingdom of God is found within. They were not a single church, but a diverse collection of spiritual seekers who valued direct, personal experience with the divine over blind obedience to a growing church hierarchy. But as the Roman Empire co-opted Christianity, their teachings became a threat. In the year 391, Emperor Theodosius ordered the destruction of all texts considered heretical. The Gnostic Christians knew they possessed something too precious to be lost. In an act of profound spiritual defiance, the monks of a monastery near Nag Hammadi in Upper Egypt took their entire library, 52 priceless, sacred texts, including the Gospels of Mary Magdalene, Thomas, and Philip, and sealed them in large ceramic jars. They buried them in the desert caves near their monastery. History tells us these monks were likely executed for refusing to renounce their beliefs and reveal where they had hidden their knowledge. Those jars, a time capsule of forbidden truth, remained hidden in the sand for nearly 1,600 years until a peasant accidentally discovered them in 1945. They sacrificed their lives not for a doctrine, but for the principle that knowledge should be preserved, not destroyed. But the Gnostics were not the only guardians. Centuries later, the ember of their teaching flared up again, this time in the very region where Magdalene had lived and died. In the 11th century, a powerful spiritual movement known as the Cathars emerged in southern France. This was not a coincidence. The Cathars, whose name means the pure ones, preserved oral traditions transmitted for centuries about the sang real, the royal blood, about the lineage of Christ, and about Mary, the beloved, who guarded the mysteries. Their core beliefs were a direct echo of Magdalene's testament. They rejected the corrupt, materialistic Roman Church, calling it the Church of Cain. They believed in direct knowledge, or gnosis. They revered the sacred feminine and taught the equality of men and women, even allowing women to be spiritual leaders, or perfectae. According to Inquisition documents, studied by historians like Dr. Malcolm Barber, the Cathars possessed a sacred text they called the Book of Love, and according to testimonies extracted under brutal torture, that book contained the last words of Mary, the beloved of the Lord. This was a truth the Vatican could not tolerate. In 1209, Pope Innocent III launched the Albigensian Crusade, a holy war designed not to convert, but to exterminate. For 20 years, southern France was drenched in blood. The papal legate, Arnaud Amaury, upon being asked how to distinguish Cathars from Catholics during the massacre of Béziers, uttered the infamous words that would define the crusade: "Kill them all. God will recognize his own." 20,000 men, women, and children were murdered in a single day. But before the fall of the last Cathar bastion, the mountain fortress of Montségur, in 1244, a miracle of resistance occurred. On the night before the final surrender, 4 Cathar perfecti escaped, lowered by ropes down a sheer cliff face. They were not carrying gold or jewels. They were carrying the treasure of the Cathars, their sacred documents, the texts the church was desperate to destroy. They were never officially recovered. The truth, once again, had been carried into the shadows. Then came the most famous and mysterious guardians of all, the Knights Templar. Officially founded in 1119 to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land, the Order of the Temple quickly became something far more powerful and secretive. According to compelling research by scholars like Dr. Margaret Starbird, the Templars discovered something during their 9 years of excavations under the ruins of Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem. Documents, evidence of Jesus' marriage to Mary Magdalene, texts that mentioned their descendants, proof of the sacred lineage. This discovery transformed them. They returned to France not just as soldiers, but as initiates into the secret. they developed a covert devotion to Mary Magdalene and the Sacred Feminine. They built magnificent cathedrals in her honor all over France, encoding symbols of the divine feminine into their architecture. They became the guardians of the knowledge of the Sang Real. The famous Cathedral of Chartres, financed by the Templars, is a testament to this secret. It contains over 170 representations of the Virgin, but symbolic analyses reveal that many do not represent Mary, the mother of Jesus. They represent Mary Magdalene, Our Lady, encoded in the stones so that initiates could recognize her, but their power and their secret knowledge made them a threat. On Friday, October 13th, 1307, King Philip IV of France, deep in debt to the Templars, conspired with a weak Pope Clement V to destroy the order. In a coordinated dawn raid, all Templars in France were arrested. They were brutally tortured to confess to fabricated heresies. Their properties were confiscated. Their leaders, including the Grand Master Jacques de Molay, were burned at the stake. But the Church and the King did not get what they truly wanted. Days before the arrests, the legendary Templar fleet vanished from the port of La Rochelle, taking with it their greatest treasures, not gold, but their archives, their knowledge, the sacred documents. They sailed to safe havens in Scotland and Portugal, and there, under new names and new forms through Masonic lodges, through Rosicrucian societies, they continued their mission of protection, preserving the knowledge in symbols and rituals, waiting for a time when the world would be ready to hear it. Do you see the pattern? The Gnostics, the Cathars, the Templars. They were not disparate groups of heretics. They were links in a single, unbroken chain of guardianship. They were all preserving the same dangerous, liberating truth that Mary Magdalene had entrusted to her children. And they were all persecuted, massacred, and destroyed by the same institutional power that could not allow that truth to survive. The war for the truth has been long and bloody, but the guardians never failed. Now we arrive at the heart of this millennial mystery. The final testament of Mary Magdalene, protected by the blood of martyrs, was encoded into a symbol so powerful it has haunted the Western imagination for 1,000 years, the Holy Grail. For centuries, the popular narrative has presented the Grail as the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper, or the chalice that Joseph of Arimathea used to collect the blood of Christ on the cross. A physical relic of immense power. But this literal interpretation, subtly encouraged by the Church, is the perfect smokescreener, beautiful story designed to hide a much more dangerous truth. The Grail was never an object. It was a code, a metaphor, a symbol for something that the ecclesiastical authorities were desperate to conceal. The key lies within the language itself. The term Holy Grail in modern English comes from the Old French, Saint Grail. But medieval scholars and mystics, the very people who wrote these stories, were playing a sophisticated word game. With a simple shift of a space, Saint Grail becomes Sang Real. And Sang Real, in Old French, means royal blood. The Holy Grail was never a cup. It was the lineage, the sacred blood of Christ, continuing through the generations. The vessel that carried the Sang Real was not made of wood or gold. It was the womb that carried the royal bloodline. It was the body of Mary Magdalene. This interpretation is not a modern invention. It is hidden in plain sight within the greatest medieval literary works about the Grail. Let's examine the evidence. In Wolfram von Eschenbach's epic poem, Parzival, written around 1210, the Grail is explicitly not a cup. It is a stone that grants eternal life, a stone that fell from heaven. And this stone is protected by a specific family, passed down from generation to generation. The text explicitly states that only those whose name is written on the stone can approach it. What does this mean? A stone is a symbol of lineage, of foundation, of something solid and permanent passed from parent to child. The names written on the stone are those who belong to the bloodline by birth. Chrétien de Troyes, in his original Grail romance, Perceval, is even more mysterious. He describes the Grail as an object that appears in a procession, carried by a maiden. He never explicitly says it is a cup. What he does describe is its effect. It grants life, healing, and perpetual sustenance. Exactly what a sacred lineage would do, perpetuate divine life through the generations. And most crucially, the guardian of the Grail in the story is the Fisher King, a wounded king who can only be healed by the right knight. The Fisher King was a transparent medieval symbol for Christ. The fish, ichthys in Greek, was the secret symbol of the early Christians. A wounded Fisher King who needs to be restored is the very image of Christ's lineage that was attacked, suppressed, and is in need of recognition once again. And here is the detail that connects everything. The Grail legends are geographically concentrated in southern France, the exact same region where traditions place Mary Magdalene and her children. The paths the knights follow in their quests pass through Provence, through Languedoc, through the same lands where the Cathars preserved their traditions about the sacred blood. This is not a coincidence. The medieval authors who wrote these stories were encoding a historical truth they could not express directly for fear of being burned as heretics. And the Knights Templar, who financed many of these literary works, were using the Grail narrative as a public-facing vehicle to preserve the secret knowledge of the Sangreal they had discovered. The Holy Grail they sought was not a material treasure to be displayed. It was the recognition that Christ's lineage, initiated with Mary Magdalene and transmitted through Sarah and Maximin, continued to exist, protected by secret communities. And the true purpose of this lineage was not to establish a political dynasty. It was to demonstrate that the divine flows through human blood, mixing with humanity until all potentially carry that sacred spark. This is why the quest for the Grail in the medieval stories never ends with a knight finding an object and displaying it triumphantly. It ends with understanding, with inner illumination, with the knight recognizing something within himself. Because the Grail is not out there waiting to be found, it is within. It has always been within. It is the recognition of your own divine nature, your own connection to the sacred lineage that Mary Magdalene protected and transmitted. Her words to her children were precisely about this, that they were not guardians of a mystical object, nor protectors of an exclusive dynasty. They were bearers of a truth that had to be sown widely, that all humans are the Grail, all humans carry the divine, all humans have direct access to the sacred source without need for institutional intermediaries. And this truth was so dangerous that it had to be hidden in metaphors of mystical chalices and chivalric quests for centuries. But now, in this time of revelation, the code is being deciphered, and the truth that Mary Magdalene taught is emerging from the shadows where it was forced to hide. So where does this journey leave us? Mary Magdalene's last words were more than a testament. They were a prophecy, a seed of truth planted in darkness, waiting for a time when the world would be ready for its return. That time is now. Her message, carried through centuries of sacrifice, was never meant to create a new religion. It was meant to awaken a truth that has always lived inside of you, that you have a direct and personal connection to the divine, that you are the temple, that you are an heir to the sacred lineage, not by blood, but by spirit. This is not a historical lesson. It is a spiritual activation. The guardians risked their lives so that this knowledge could reach you, not for you to simply know it, but for you to become it. The choice is now yours, to remain a spectator of history or to become a conscious participant in the Great Awakening. And now, I want to hear from you. Declare. If you are ready to claim your spiritual inheritance and be a part of this awakening, write the phrase, "The light has returned," in the comments below. Pray. Leave your prayer request. We are a community of guardians, and we intercede for one another. Subscribe. This journey is far from over. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next investigation. Like. And finally, if this message awakens something in you, hit the like button. Let the world know that after 2,000 years of darkness, the light is shining again. Now, shine.